Welcome back to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andy Temte. On the Balancing Act, we talk to business leaders and industry experts to explore the balancing acts we play in our professional lives and learn about the events that put rocket boosters behind their career success. Today, we have Andy Rosen joining us. Andy is my former boss and chairman and chief executive officer of the global education giant Kaplan Incorporated. Everybody can see who's watching on YouTube. I've got my Kaplan shirt on. Obviously, I spent a lot of time there. Andy Rosen, you can see in his frame, has his Kaplan shirt on. We are here to celebrate 200 episodes of this show, and we're going to celebrate Kaplan today because the show got its start while I was still at Kaplan. So, welcome to the show, Andy. I'm so happy you're here.
I'm happy to be here, Andy, and congratulations on 200 episodes. That's an incredible accomplishment, and 200 episodes of jam-packed content. Like, this is not fluff. This is real stuff, and people who listen are going to be better managers as a result. So, congratulations.
Well, thank you for that. And you are the second repeat guest on the show. Episode number 199, the one right before this, was with our son Brandon Temte talking about medical education and making better medical decisions. So you are now my second repeat guest. So thank you so much for that.
Well, that's pretty good company to follow in. So, Brandon is a star in his field. So
yeah, we spent all last week talking about how consumers can make better medical decisions in the face of all the mis and disinformation that's out there. You were on the show way back in episode number 45. So folks heard your story back then. But let me just ask you, what's one thing that most people don't know about Andy Rosen?
Well, there are probably a couple of things I could say, but, you mentioned Brandon and, he saves lives. And what popped into my mind is that you may not know this. You probably don't. I was born with a heart defect that was at the time 100% fatal by the time, a child turns 10.
Wow.
There was research being done on how to fix this, and there were experiments with a surgery. And so my parents really were engaged in a balancing act, because as you get bigger, there's more strain on your heart, and so there's a certain point at which your heart just can't take it. And so they had this balance between, they wanted me to survive long enough for the research to catch up and come up with some kind of procedure that could fix this problem that I had. And they ended up in fact getting there. But I had a procedure at Boston Children's, which is part of Harvard, when I was 6 years old, and I was one of the first to survive the procedure. And I may have been the first to have a cure that is completely, solved. And I think that, and by the way, I know that because, or not just that, but I learned when I was at Boston Children's for, the better part of the summer. I was in a room with a bunch of other little kids who also had the same kind of problem, and my parents told me years later that I was the only one among them that survived. All these little kids that I, became good little friends of mine, and it's terrible, but it always made me feel that I got a bonus. I got sort of a second chance, and that I have some responsibility to do something with that. And the balancing act that my parents played just right deserves to be rewarded. And I would also say that when there's talk about, like, should we fund medical research, or some of the attacks on Harvard, which was, it was the Harvard research that enabled me to be here today. I have a special feeling, and I think about the parents who are going through that balancing act today, hoping that their child can stay alive long enough for that research to catch up and provide, cures for them. Like to the extent that that gets frozen or even held off a couple of months,
Yeah.
there are real people and really real lives at stake. And it's not a story I tell very often because when does that come up? But it is something I think about when I see the news nowadays.
Wow, I am so glad I asked you that question. I mean, I had deep respect for you before this, but now it's just through the roof what you and your family went through, and the fact that all of us at Kaplan and in the education industry are the beneficiaries of you being the one that made it. Wow, that's what a story.
Well, I mean, just so you know, I mean, I'm the fifth of five, so I was kind of expendable. So, but my parents treated me as though I was equally important to everybody else. So,
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, on that, continuing with that, we might as well just stop the show right there because that's like such a huge story. Thank you for that constructive vulnerability. But we're here to celebrate 200 episodes and all things Kaplan. I usually ask my guests their personal rocket booster question, but I want to shift that today to Kaplan. If you had to pick a defining, pivotal moment in the evolution of Kaplan, other than Jonathan Grayer's "we had to buy more computers" story that I heard about 10 times early in my time at Kaplan, what was Kaplan's rocket booster moment in its evolution?
yeah. Well, I actually do, talk about Jonathan as the second founder of Kaplan because
Yeah,
of the dying business that he revived. But I think actually I might say that when we were trying to fix this really struggling business early on, um, we were we were making some progress, and we got revenue to start growing instead of shrinking. We're still losing money and everything, and in the midst of that, we were a test prep business, but we declared ourselves to be an education business. We're an education company, and it's kind of breathtaking in its arrogance, because we had not in any way fixed the test prep business, but we decided that we're not a test prep company, we're an education company, and that reshaped our thinking, and it set the stage for expanding into professional training, which is what brought you into the company, Andy,
yep,
into higher education, into global expansion, and I really think that like how we describe ourselves shapes how we think about ourselves, and how we think about ourselves manifests in who we become. And that simple decision to say we're not a test prep company, we're an education company, really created the platform on which all of the rest of Kaplan ultimately grew.
yeah. Now, what time is this? What year is this? Or are you sitting in 888 7th Avenue
Yep. Yep.
in the conference room? I can't remember what the floor was, but were you guys there?
Yeah, we were exactly it. Good memory. Yeah, this would have been '96, let's say.
Yeah.
Like in the early in the mid 1990s. Uh, if you track Kaplan over the years, it was losing money through all that period until the late '90s. So we definitely we're not done with test prep, and but it was an important step.
Yeah. Well, now, if we stopped a random person on the street today and asked them what Kaplan is known for, an unaided recall question, they'd probably talk about test prep. I know that I get that when I talk to folks about my time there. So, continuing with this theme, what's one thing that most people don't know about Kaplan that you just really wish would come up in an unaided recall survey like that?
Yeah. Well, I would just say that it depends on what street you're on.
Yeah.
That people would say that. On Wall Street, they would say we're a professional training company. If you're in Singapore or in Dublin or in Australia, and you said, "Who is Kaplan?" They'd say, "Oh, well, that's the largest private educational, you know, institution in our country." Or if you go to really any of those countries, or say the UK, they would say, "Oh, well, that's the dominant professional training organization, especially in finance, or in some cases in health or legal." So I would just say that different people would have a different answer to that question. And when we had Kaplan University, a lot of people would you know not the sort of highly educated crowd that big shots like you hang out with, but sort of cab driver or whatever. Like those people would think of Kaplan University. But I guess what I would let me answer the question though. What I'd love for people to understand, they all think of, they see an ad for Kaplan and they think, oh, I want to get my certificate in this, or I want to go to, my kid is going to go to college or whatever. Um, a lot of our business, in fact, the majority of our business is in the less visible world of serving institutions. So universities and companies and governments, and helping them be better at their priorities. So more so actually than serving consumers and students directly. But it's also the case that, we're a huge force in helping students move from one country to another to study. And so I think very few people understand that, as far as we know, we bring more students into the US and into the UK and into Australia, into Singapore than anyone else in the world to study, into our own programs or into our partner programs. So Kaplan is a lot broader in terms of the types of programs it offers and in terms of the geographic scope that I think most people appreciate.
Yeah. No, it is a big, very diverse business, and the educational pathways part of the business is. I was hoping that you were going to bring that up, because that's the bit that when I tell people about Kaplan, and that's a big part of the business, they like, wow, I had no idea that they did that. So
Yeah, people are surprised because we're working on behalf of others for most of that, and so Kaplan is an invisible provider behind other, big names, and so, which is fine with us.
yeah.
But it does mean that people, they see us where we present ourselves, in our brand, but where that brand is very powerful with organizations that need exactly the kind of help we can provide.
Yeah. So speaking of those organizations, post-secondary higher education institutions, the education landscape is changing quickly, very quickly. Political forces, artificial intelligence, kind of you name it.
Mhm.
They're being disrupted, and new models are being tested around the world. You wrote a book back in 2011 called ChangeEDU, and you outlined the 7 certainties of education that you expected to occur between 2011 and 2036. So you were looking out into the future at the time, 25-year time horizon. As you sit here at the midpoint of that 25-year time horizon, what are you most disappointed in as you look at the lack of progress in the sector?
Yeah, I actually think that there has been progress on all those things, but I would say that uh, I guess I'm often frustrated by how slowly higher education moves. But I thought we'd be seeing more of, one of those 7 certainties was I thought we'd see more disaggregation of learning by now. So what I mean by that is, universities are a bundled product, right? We don't really think of it this way, but the university provides the classrooms, and they hire and they train and they evaluate the instructors. They teach and they provide the grades for the courses. They bundle the classes into degree programs. They validate the completion of the educational experience. They offer the credential. If it's on a campus, that same entity houses and feeds and provides entertainment for the student. Like, you're buying all that from the same provider. And it's kind of rare in our economy that such a big, broad service is provided by just one provider at a time. People can transfer schools, but then they have to buy that entire bundle. I really thought that by now we'd be seeing more of students taking some classes from one institution, others from another. There would might be a validator who is separate from either of those and doing the credentialing. But it's there's some of that going on, but it is slow going, and I think it would be great if students had the choice to select those pieces of the educational experience that they want and reject the things that they don't want or don't want to pay for. I think that would be a very healthy move for the sector that like many things, is going too slowly.
Yeah, you and I and Greg Marino and a whole host of folks have been talking about this, and do a lot of doing over the years on this front. Disaggregation of a monolithic credential into its component parts, being able to stack those things on top of each other, reducing cost to serve, and all of that. So I too am disappointed in that. But what are you encouraged by as you look at your list of 7 certainties, and what progress have we made?
I think again, I think there's a lot of progress. There is some progress on a lot of things, but one that I think has moved more quickly than I would have expected is I thought education would become more mobile. And you have to remember, we're talking about 2011. When I wrote the book, universities generally shunned online education, and some with just a withering condescension.
Yeah.
Toward, because in part because it was almost entirely for-profit institutions that were offering online education. And it was right about when I published the book that there was a New York Times article about a Stanford course that was that a bunch Stanford had a single course online, and a lot of students were signing up for it. And it was about then that the press declared that Stanford had invented this concept called online education. We've been doing it for 15 years. But when Stanford did it, that was a whole other story. And so,
Right.
so God bless Stanford for inventing it.
Yeah.
But that kind of opened the door. It made it sort of politically permissible for other universities to think about having programs online. And so schools started to think about an online strategy. But I will say that for all of the heat and the condescension the for-profit sector took around creating online education and popularizing it, um, through the process, we were building the tools and the pedagogies for delivering education online. And thank God we did, because when the pandemic hit,
Mm-hmm.
The entire world took advantage of what this woebegone for-profit sector had created over a period of decades. And, and then, of course, the pandemic legitimized and popularized online education to the point where it's not in the least controversial anymore. And now, it took a global pandemic for that to happen, which I definitely didn't foresee in the book, but
Right.
It has happened, and it's not going back. And I think that if you had shown me the picture of where we are today with the normalization of online education back in 2011, I think I would have been pretty surprised and impressed. And so I'm encouraged on that front.
Yeah. So if you were to rewrite change.edu today, what would be the main theme? And, what's the big, hairy, audacious goal, using Jim Collins' terminology, that the sector needs to solve over the next 25 years?
I think, the way I process that question is, I think, what would be the spine of the book? What would be the piece that holds it together if I redo it? And I think of really 2 things. One is the trust collapse and how education can regain trust.
Yeah.
If you think about just from 2011 to this year, I mean, the public perception of higher ed in particular has declined dramatically.
Yeah.
And I think it actually is because of some of the main themes of my book. Not because of my book, but because of the themes that I described in my book. That U.S. higher education is too expensive. It delivers too little. It's not accountable enough. And I think those things, plus a lot of politics, have started to, have weighed down in the sector. But so that would be one sort of theme, but another totally different one is how AI is going to reshape education. I mean, that's obviously uh, core to the future, and I actually think that I probably would pull those pieces together because I would make the argument, and I do make the argument that AI can be a really valuable tool in helping to rebuild trust by making universities deliver a lot more value at a lower cost. And there's a whole conversation to be had about how that can happen. But AI is a big part of, I think, of the solution to some of the core issues that have plagued higher ed, if higher ed is willing to accept it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for both of those. I've been teaching at my local university, and I scratch my head a bit on some of the policies that have been put in place as it relates to artificial intelligence. A lot of faculty are just, pushing back, and my students would come into the class and say, "Can we use AI?" And I'm like, "Absolutely, you can use AI. You're going to use artificial intelligence in your jobs when you leave here. Why wouldn't I want you to, use those tools, learn about them? Of course, you need to attribute your work because that's, you need to be able to stand behind your work when you get out into the workplace. You're not just going to be able to stand in front of Andy Rosen in a conference room and say, yeah, AI wrote this for me. I really don't know what this says. To be pushing back that strongly on these tools, I just scratch my head a little bit.
Yeah, our friend, our colleague Bror Saxberg, who I think you've had on the show.
Yeah.
He makes this point that when you give a doctor a new tool, a new technology or something, the doctor always says, "Fantastic! This is going to make me an even better doctor." You give a teacher a new tool, and they say, "What, you're trying to replace me?"
Yeah.
And we really need the education industry to think more like the medical industry, to think that these are tools, because they're tools that can make a faculty member more effective.
Yeah.
Students are going to be beneficiaries for sure, but the more we can integrate these tools to empower our faculty to be more successful, the better off we're going to be.
Yeah. And by the way, Bror has not been on the show. And Bror Saxberg, if you're listening to this, I absolutely want you on the show, and I'll be reaching out. We're going to take a short commercial break, and we'll be right back with Andy Rosen. Hey everyone, I'd like to invite you to start your weekend with me on the Saturday Morning Muse podcast. I briefly explore topics that span leadership, business management, education, and personal continuous improvement. Subscribe to the Saturday Morning Muse podcast on your favorite podcast streaming app or visit andrewtemte.com for more information. And we're back with Andy Rosen talking about the education industry and Kaplan. And we've been talking about Kaplan, but I want to talk specifically about the business. Andy, this question is not a fair question at all, kind of like asking a dad who their favorite child is. But at this moment, what are you most proud of about the company that you lead?
Well, first of all, I've seen you as a dad. I think you probably feel the same way that I do, which is I believe it's okay to celebrate one child if they do something great. If they get a good grade and they score the winning goal, or they do something especially kind. It doesn't diminish one child to praise the other. As long as you got that long-term balance.
Yeah.
I'm trying to fold it in as much as possible, that balancing act, but it's true with business as well. You're broadly proud of all of your team, but some deserve special celebration, at any given time. And I'd say for us, I would put our U.S. supplemental education team in that mix right now because, which is what we previously referred to as test prep and professional, the business that you ran, because they have faced some difficult market dynamics that price points have come down, competition has increased. During the pandemic, tests were made optional and so on, and some of that is not restored. But that business, through exactly the way a business ought to work, by continuing to increase the quality of the offerings and the services that we provide to students, is turning, really solidly in the right direction. And it's because the team, Greg Marino's team and Steve Marietti, and a lot of really talented people that we both know have muscled it back into really strong growth. And I feel really proud about them. And at the same time, we have a business that has just struggled for, separate business that's really struggled. I'm not going to even say which one it is, but it's struggled for quite a few years, got really hard hit by the pandemic for a variety of reasons. The market hasn't come back since. But we got a great team. The engagement scores of that team are great. I mean, people are motivated to come to work, and the NPS scores, the student NPS scores, are in their 70s, so it's
Oh,
fantastic.
awesome.
Delivering great programs for our students. They're enhancing our brand. They're helping students achieve their goals. It's just not a financial success, but I'm really proud of them because in an especially tough period where they don't get sort of the plaudits that others get for their financial performance, they just keep on delivering terrific student results. And so that's in the same way that sometimes your kid is going through a tough time and you're proud of how they're handling it.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about this group. And it's not all. That's not. I know that's wasn't the way you are. It's not the way I am. Where you just rank your team by growth or whatever your financial metric. It's a lot of things, and some teams are dealt a tougher hand, and they have to play that hand, and sometimes they play a tough hand really well.
Yeah.
What you want is a great team uh, in a great market. That's always the best, but sometimes you don't get that, and you got to feel really good about those who navigate through whatever circumstances they're living in.
Yeah, grit is really, really important in business, and when teams show that grit and determination through the tough times, that's that should be celebrated. And I appreciate you doing that, Andy. This is the Balancing Act podcast, and I appreciate all the plugs so far. But let's talk specifically about balancing acts, and what's the biggest balancing act that you and the rest of the Kaplan senior team are wrestling with right here in the middle of 2025?
Yeah, there's so many, and that's why I think you've hit on something with your media empire that you've built. There's so many balancing acts going on. At Kaplan, as you know, um, people have a trust in us because when they show up, they will get what they expected. We don't. You don't show up in one place and your experience is fantastic, and the next place it's a disaster, and so on. They expect us to have built the machinery to consistently deliver excellence every time. But sometimes the processes that you put in place in order to achieve that consistency can serve as a constraint on innovation because we live in a world where you cannot slow down on your innovation. And so that balancing act of systematizing but still enabling individuals and teams to build great things and test things, that's a balancing act that I think is one that we've always been dealing with and we still are.
Yeah.
um, there's obviously I could say that AI and how you integrate AI into an organization, how you build that organization, is another balancing act that's really central to my life now and our team's life.
Yeah. So, final question before our lightning round. I'm going to put you in a thought experiment in front of a new Kaplan hire. So somebody just got hired into the company. They're sitting in front of you right now. Your time with them is short because you gotta go off to something else, and they've got to go off to something else. So you can only send one main message to them. What do you tell this individual as they begin their tenure with a great company called Kaplan?
Yeah. Well, actually, that it sounds like a hard question. It's actually an easy one because we have something for exactly that purpose. It's called the Kaplan Way. And I don't know if you can see. I don't know if the camera goes wide enough, but I have a Kaplan Way logo over here. But the Kaplan Way, their Kaplan Way represents the four pillars of what matters to Kaplan, and we use it internally to say, no matter what you're doing, because we got people all over the world at any given time, and they're making decisions on our behalf, and we want them to think about, if I act in accordance with the Kaplan Way, then I'll be fine, no matter what I do, as long as it's consistent with the Kaplan Way. And the Kaplan Way has four pillars. First is student success. If you take a step that is in furtherance of the success of our students, good for you. You might make a bad choice, but you're going to be celebrated for it. Second is what we call a great place. That is, Kaplan should be a great place for people to work and a great place for students to study. The third pillar is continuous transformation. We recognize that whatever we're doing now is not going to cut it in the future. So if you're a person who likes stability, likes to be in this, do the same thing year after year, we tell people we're not the place for you, because this is an industry that moves quickly, and we got to be ready to move with it.
Yep.
And fourth is our shared values, which integrity, support, knowledge, opportunity, and results. Everything we do is in adherence with our shared values. So if I had a new employee and I was trying to say who is Kaplan, I would describe to them the Kaplan Way and say, you got to sign on to feel you got to feel great about living your career pursuant to these four pillars. And if you're good with that, then this will be a good place for you.
Excellent. Well, as your test subject, I'm ready to go. Put me in, coach. All right. So, Andy, let's end the show with a little bit of fun. 3 lightning round questions for you. You just won a $100 million lotto jackpot, but there's a stipulation that half of your net winnings go to one philanthropic organization or cause. Who do you pick?
Okay, well that's not a bad stipulation. I'd be happy if you do your part, I'll do mine.
Yeah.
You give me the 100 million, and I'll be happy.
Sure.
I would say, Marcel and I, my wife and I, are involved in a number of organizations that do something similar, and you're involved in one of these organizations quite a bit yourself, and that is, we and our families, our kids, we take for granted that throughout a lifetime, we're giving this constant guidance. And my parents did a version of this of here's what colleges look like. Here's what kind of jobs exist out there. Here's, when you read this in the news, here's what it means. But there are a lot of kids out there who don't have any of that. There's no one to contextualize the world for them. And so I'm involved in a number of organizations, in the Kaplan Educational Foundation, which you've been really supportive of and helpful, and is one of them, in which we take young people, in the case of Kaplan Educational Foundation, it's community college students, and give them the kind of mentorship and support and guidance that most of us take for granted. And what it tells you is most kids don't need all the things that we give our children, but they need some. They need someone to believe in them, someone to help them sort out the confusing stream of information about the world, and in particular, in our case, how do you go to a college? What is expected of you? Are you worthy of going to a school? Because a lot of kids, they think it's for somebody else, not for them, when in fact they're every bit as talented as the kids who go to a great school. So, in New York, here in Florida where I live, and in DC, like we are involved in a number of those organizations because I see the incredible power. And having done this for over a period of decades, now seeing people who've gone through these programs that we've known and cared about and spent time with and supported, who now have families of their own and great jobs and are very successful and pillars of their community. And it's just, these are people who didn't have that kind of path.
Yeah.
Without the support that they got. And it's so, boy, $100 million would help a lot of kids go from a desolate future to a great future, because it's not about their talent, it's about their opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you for mentioning the Kaplan Educational Foundation. Great organization. Second question, I give you access to a time machine. You can send a message to an earlier version of Andy Rosen. What's the message, and what previous version of yourself do you send it to?
I think I would send this to every version of myself, including the current version, which is really work hard at finding what's interesting about others. I think we all come across people. I mean, we sort of dismiss a lot of them because they don't click with us. They pass through and there's nothing interesting to us about them. So I would, what I've learned and what I would tell the younger version of myself is, almost everyone has an interesting story.
Yep.
And if I don't elicit that in conversation, that's on me, not on them, because most people aren't boring. It's my ability to bring out what makes them tick, or what makes them passionate. That's where the problem is my ability to get to that, because once you get a direct hit into that passion, you light up all kinds of interesting things. So, like, we all dismiss people or just ignore. People are invisible to us. All those people walking by have interesting stories that we can learn from, that we can be entertained by, but we don't give enough of ourselves to work to elicit that. So that would be my advice. I still try to live by that advice, but fall short.
Well, leading into the final question, we're all works in progress. So what are you focused on right now in your personal journey of growth as a leader?
Well, I don't know. I know you like to get like deep into the soul on these things, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do that here, because I can tell you what I'm really focused on is, I've been a Kaplan for as long as I have, because it keeps evolving and it doesn't feel like the same job.
Yeah.
And now, rethinking how we operate in a world of AI and how the organization should function in that world is a really cool new journey for me and for all of us. I mean, because, we want to keep what's great about our culture and our people, while being, 10 times more productive because of the amazing new tools that we have. It's definitely the case. Students are going to be the big winners in this world, because we're all going to be, every competitor and institutions can be scrambling to provide more. But making sure that the people who work in our organization are also winners is, I think, a fun and compelling and interesting challenge that I feel like this is a really cool chapter we've got coming up.
That's great. Well, Andy, we're at the end of our time. 200 episodes in the books. Really, really appreciative of Kaplan giving us our start, and for you to come back and join us again on the show. I'm certain it won't be the last time, but thank you so much for being here today.
I hope not. Congratulations, Andy. You deserve a lot of plaudits for what you've done, and it's not just 200 episodes. It's really good quality stuff. Congratulations.
Well, thank you, Andy. My name is Andy Temte. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find us on all the major streaming services, as well as out on YouTube. You can see two Andys today if you join us on YouTube. Please like, subscribe, rate, and most importantly, share this public good with your friends, your colleagues, your family members, your neighbors. Show is produced by Nicholas Temte, and we'll see you next time on the Balancing Act.